I'm on a quest to find the best workflow for the Behringer X-Touch and Reaper. I've already looked at using the X-Touch just out of the box with what you can do with Reaper, but now we're looking at extensions, and first up is the DrivenByMoss4REAPER extension. This video is part of a series, and if you missed the previous video where I talked about all the features of the X-Touch and what you can do with Reaper, click the link down in the description. And in this video, we're looking at the first extension, DrivenByMoss4REAPER, and there will be a link in the description of the video. This video will be broken up into chapters, starting with installation, and then we'll get into the various sections of the controller and how it works with the extension. In general, I will stick to the facts of how things work at the time of the recording of this video, but there will be some times where I'm putting in my opinion of how things should work or what I find to be more intuitive, or maybe I just have a feature request, and things may change in the future. But as it is right now, this is how the extension works with this controller. So let's get started. Installation. So this is the site for downloading this Reaper extension. There is a video on installing this, but I'm going to try to get through this quickly here. I'm on a M1 Mac, so I'm going to download the Mac OS ARM download. That'll hit my downloads folder. I'll extract it, and it comes up here. So I'll just copy that, go to my Reaper resources folder. I'll go to user plugins, and then in here, I'll hit paste. I've got my DrivenByMoss extension. I have the documents folder, the library folder, all the stuff that comes with DrivenByMoss. On Windows is going to be a similar situation. Just watch his video on the details there. Now, because I'm on Mac Monterey, there are additional security features that need to be addressed whenever you're installing a third-party extension. So you drop that drivenbymoss.dylib into the user plugins folder, and then I want to right-click on my reaper.app and open. I'll get a warning, and it'll come up here. I'll have to approve it in this window, Security and Privacy General, then quit Reaper, then run it again, and finally, I'll be able to use it. Coming to Reaper and opening up the preferences, I want to go to MIDI devices and make sure that my Behringer X-Touch is disabled for input and output. Then scroll down to the bottom here. We're going to Control OSC Web, click on Add, Control Surface Mode, DrivenByMoss4REAPER, and then click Configure. Now I have already done this once before, so it is here. But let's just remove it. I can click on Add and then select Mackie MCU Control Universal and then Configure. And now I just choose the X-Touch internal for input and output. For profile, I select the X-Touch. And at this point, if I start adding in more tracks, it comes to life and is fully working. So the extension is installed and it is working with my controller. There are a few things in the configuration that I have changed over time, past couple weeks that I've been using this. And so I'll go through those things now. Track navigation section. If you have this set to flat, which is the default, it will be one track per fader on your controller, and folders will look normal. There's also hierarchical, which is the hardest word in the world to say, and that after you restart Reaper, it sets up folders as kind of something that you can expand on the controller. I think that's a really cool way to work. Obviously, personal preference, and it may work better or worse for you. I'm kind of liking it. And then I set up the F buttons for different functions. So F1 on the controller adds an audio track, F2 on the controller adds an instrument track, F3 adds an effect track, F4 goes to the panel layout edit, and F5 is panel layout mix, which is just different views, like screen sets. And all these things are easy to change. You just click here and choose something from the list. So there's some preset actions. You can set it to action and then select an action from the action list if you want. There are some functions of this extension that are made for beat making, for the grid-based controllers, like the push more Ableton Live focused devices. Mostly I've eliminated that by changing all the F keys. I've also turned off select channel on fader touch. This is an interesting function and it's helpful in some areas, but in other areas it gets in the way. And mainly it's a problem because you can't select multiple tracks and then use the faders. I had to turn that off. In this browser section, there are various things that we can turn on and off. So collection, show, hide. This actually doesn't hide it from the browser, but it hides it from the knobs on the controller. I'll show you that later. Another personalization setting that I did was change some of the actions for this extension to bring up the different windows. So option F3, I have open the configuration window, which is just this settings window. And then option F2 opens the parameter settings window or the plugin settings window to customize the plugin window. And I'll just show you that shortcut now. I won't get into the customization, but you need the track selected, then a plugin selected in the effects chain, or a plugin floating. And then I hit my option F2, and that brings up the plugin parameter mapping window. We will come back to that later. One interesting thing about this controller extension, and I think this is the only one that does this, there's actually an on-screen overlay showing which mode you are in. We're going to start off with the first mode on the controller, which is track. There's actually two modes here. There's track and volume. I've got my drum bus folder here. I can select it. I can change the volume. I'm in volume mode, so the knob and the fader control volume. I can also press the track button again, and now this is the fader for track, or fader for volume, and then a fader for pan, which is kind of cool. I can tap a button to reset that. With the display button, we can change between displaying the volume or displaying the name plus volume, and global view will turn off the metering. So that we've got the standard select, mute, solo, record, enable. That works as you would expect. What's a little different in this extension is the hierarchical setup for folders. So if I double tap on the select button, that shows inside the folder. So now I've got my kick, snare, hat, and cymbals on separate tracks, and I'm not seeing any other track. I'm only seeing what's in the folder. And again, I can select them, I can mute them, I can solo them, all that stuff. And if I want to go back, I long press and it goes back. And I can double tap on my percussion folder. And now I've got all of those percussion samples, long press to return. So when we're on the pan mode, this is actually the mode you're probably going to be using the most, where we've got the knobs for panning and the volume fader controlling only the volume. We can press the display button to go between showing the name or the pan, and then on the flip button we can use the faders for pan. So now I'm controlling pan, or flip again, and now the faders are for volume. So kind of the default mode that you'll be working in with this extension, with this controller, is the pan mode. So just making sure it says PN there. I find that to be the most intuitive fader mixer workflow. EQ mode. I'm going to select my bass track, and if I press the EQ button, it will automatically add in re-EQ and select it on this track. And this gives you control over all of the frequency bands on re-EQ. So I can adjust the low shelf frequency, the gain, and the Q, band 2 frequency, and gain for band 2 and the Q. If I want to go over to the next page of settings, I use the channel left-right buttons, and that will scroll through up until you get to the bypass, wet, and delta. If I want to make a quick adjustment for one of these, so let's say the high Q, shift for minimum, no modifier for default, and option for maximum. So that's the EQ mode. It only works with re-EQ, and it doesn't really work with the normal plugin mode. Next, we're moving on to the sends mode. So when I press the send button, on screen it says sends 1 track 17. And if I adjust this knob, that's controlling the send level in the Reaper mixer for send 1. If I press the flip button, now I've got the send level on the fader, and the knob is the same. So I'm going to go back to pan mode, and that shows me all the tracks. I'm going to go over to my drum bus and expand that. And so my kick track actually has sends. So let's see if I press send 1. Now I've got a send to the cymbal. And if I press send again, that will switch to my sends for the shaker. If I switch over to the mixer, hopefully you can see that here as I adjust this. The send on the fade on the kick track to the shaker track for my side chaining is turning down. And if I select the next track, I can also do the same. Actually, don't even need to select it. And when I press that send button on the controller, the heads-up display says which track and send slot you're controlling. Up next, we have plugin view. I've got my drum bus selected. I'm going to press plugin. There are 2 modes for the plugin. So if it says DC, that's going to automatically map the plugin settings. Then if I press the plugin mode again, there's user parameters. I didn't really ever figure this mode out, but it does work pretty well with the DC mode. If we're on DC mode, we've got the various parameters here. I can press the channel button to go to the next page of settings up until it gets to the delta as the last parameter. I'll show you that again so you can see the parameters changing. Currently, the faders are working on the mixer still. So this is changing my mix balance. But if I press the flip button, now these are showing the plugin parameters. And if I want to show the plugin on screen, I press the audio tracks button on the controller. Here's how that looks. So we've got compressor 3 from Toucan here. The plugin parameter names in this particular plugin don't come up very clearly. There's my output control. There's my release. There's attack. And this is ratio. Let's move on to customizing this. I'm going to press my Alt F2 button, and that brings up this window. And this is the parameter mapping window. Unfortunately, it will go behind your plugin windows. We're going to use this to customize the layout, the order, and the names of the parameters that we'll see on the controller's display. So we're going to add in a page, and then we're going to select a parameter and then assign it to one of the slots. There's 8 slots. We can have any number of pages, I believe, and we can put the parameters in any order. So let's select ratios first, and then assign, and then click on the next slot, which will become the second fader or the second knob. And let's do threshold, and then attack, release, and then output. That'll basically be everything that I want in there. I hit save, and I can close this window. And I had to toggle to another track and then back, but the parameters are now showing there. So I've got ratio, threshold, attack, release, and then output, gain. And it's very cool to be able to adjust multiple parameters at once. Being able to ride the threshold, the output, the ratio controls on different fingers, that's fantastic. That's like the #1 reason to use this over the mouse. Now, if I go over to a track that already has several plugins on it, like my percussion, I've got Re-EQ, I've got Valhalla, Room, Compressor 3, and Saturation. So if I go to plugin button, and then nothing's showing here because I haven't selected a slot, I need to press one of these buttons. There we go. I don't know why it's like that, but I have to press them a few times before something shows up. It says mix, pre-delay, decay, high cut. That must be Valhalla Room, and I can verify that by pressing the audio tracks button, and there it is. And I can adjust these things. So there's my mix control, pre-delay, decay, high cut, and depth. This works pretty well. It's going to automatically follow the plugin's parameter names and the order. But if you want a different order, you can do that by pressing Alt F2 with the plugin selected. And you can change the order in here. Just remember to save it, and it should be good. Going to the next plugin, we're going to press the fader bank button. And now, again, my faders have switched to the layout, the custom layout that I set up for Compressor 3. Cool. And if I press that button again, here's the saturation button. So fader bank goes between the different plugins. Channel bank goes to the different pages of the plugins. And once again, I'm on the fader flip mode, which makes the 8 faders follow the plugin parameters, otherwise controlling the volume. So that's my fader for the percussion bus. The plugin mode is pretty good as something that automatically kind of gets things started. I do like that there is a custom mode that you can change the order of things. I think that window needs to be a little more optimized so that the workflow is just a little bit better. Drag and drop obviously would be one there that would be great. But unfortunately, it's somewhat limited to just kind of like a linear movement. For plugin parameters that have a really extreme range from like -infinity to +24, that's going to map kind of strangely to a fader or a knob, and you can't adjust that. There's no way to adjust the math of how things are linked. There is a way to rename a parameter. And then the other thing is that even though that there's 8 knobs and 8 faders, you can't have them both assigned to plugin parameters. So you don't have 16 available. You also don't have the option of assigning certain parameters to just push buttons. And that would be a nice thing to have. But yeah, it's a fairly solid workflow, but not perfect for the plugins. All right, moving on to some of the other buttons on the controller. There's this row of buttons here for different functions. I'm not 100% sure what the MIDI tracks button does, but the inputs button shows and hides all the automation lanes in the project. Audio tracks will bring up the plugin window. Audio instrument button will show and hide the mixer. So it's showing and it's hiding my mixer. The aux button will, these are just basically different screen sets here. And then the user button brings up the preset browser. Let's come back to that. F1 button will add in a audio track, F2 will add in an instrument track, and F3 adds in a track called effect. And you can use this to set up a send effect. F4 I have set up to show the arrange window with the mixer, and then F5 expands the mixer. F6 sets the record mode. You can see my record button changing between normal and time selection auto punch. F7 will go between normal and item selection auto punch. F8 does something, but I forget what. Shift, Option, Control, and Alt modifiers. Talked about them a little bit. Shift will tend to do the minimum value, while Alt will do the maximum value. They are used for various functions to add additional functionality. Automation buttons, they all work as normal, as you would expect. Read, write, trim, touch, latch, group. Group does latch preview. The save button will save the project. The undo button will undo the last step. Cancel will close a window if it's floating. And then enter will confirm some things, some various functions, like if you have the browser open. The marker button will switch to marker navigation mode. So I've got a few markers in this project. I've got one named start and then 2 unnamed ones. If I tap on one of the knobs, it will go there and start playing. There isn't a region mode, but yeah, that's fine. The nudge button is actually tap tempo. Pretty cool. Cycle is your loop playback or repeat project. The drop button will duplicate the last selected track. The replace button, to be honest, I'm not sure what the replace button does. I couldn't figure out what that replace button actually does. Click is your metronome. Solo will clear all solos in the project. Pretty cool, actually. So there I've soloed a few tracks and I can press this button and that clears all solos. There are buttons to navigate the project. I think this is moving about 1 second at a time. Stop, play, record. It's been very helpful to have these buttons here, but they do work kind of as expected. The jog wheel will move, it will advance the cursor forwards and backwards in the project, which is nice, super nice. Works very intuitively. I like having that. The scrub button actually doesn't change the jog function, but it changes between the different modes on the controller. And you can kind of see that up at the top, it's changing So it'll cycle between track, track volume, plugin, pan, and then back to volume. Kind of helpful if you don't want to move your arm so far. The fader bank and channel section, we've talked about that in the context of the plugin controls, but depending on how many tracks you have in a project, this is going to move all the tracks over by 8. In hierarchical mode, in this project, I have 21 tracks, but most of them are inside of 2 folders. I have my 2 bus tracks, and then all the rest fit easily on the other faders. And the channel is going to move by 1 track at a time. All right, and then the last set of buttons here, up and left, both do track selection, and then down and right do track selection downwards. Push that middle button and it switches to zoom. Pressing down increases track height. Pressing up decreases track height. Pressing right zooms in. Pressing left zooms out. So this is pretty intuitive, and I just realized now, if I hold one of these buttons and then turn the knob, that adjusts that function with the jog wheel. And so zooming horizontally, zooming vertically with the jog wheel, super nice. I didn't realize that that was a function. All right, coming back to one of these buttons, the user button. The user button on the controller activates the plugin browser. So let's go to my clap track here, and I'm going to press the user button. And so I've got this browser, and then each of these columns in the browser correspond to knobs in the controller. So I've got the collection, the location, file type, category, tags, creator, device type, and results. And these functions can be disabled within the configuration window from the controller, not from the actual browser. I would like it more if they were linked, so this window actually gets smaller as you disable different things. But it is what it is. Just an alternative view of Reaper's plugin browser, but accessible to the controller. So if I go to collection distortion, it's showing me all my distortion plugins. I can sort this to just VSTs, and then maybe just VST3s. And that list gets smaller and smaller. And then let's say beef ARM version. And if I press the user button again or enter, that will add that plugin to the track. And if I press the plugin button, now it's showing me the plugin parameters: drive, saturation mode, sub-level, low level, mid-level. The channel button will switch between the different sections, or another 8 parameters. And I can press the audio tracks button to show that plugin window. So I've got drive, I've got the saturation mode, I've got the sub-level, the low level. Now when we're in this state, if we press the user button again, it's actually going to go to a preset browser. Now I think this may be a bug here because this plugin does have presets, but it doesn't appear in the preset browser, unfortunately. And I ran into that with even the stock plugins. I think this still needs some work. And it would be really nice if this plugin window just went down to the results column instead of having all these other ones that are unused. What else can we do here? If we press Shift and then the user button, that's going to bring up the plugin browser, and we can change the location and the file types and all this stuff. Let's go to the creator. Let's take a Kakos plugin like relimit, and then add that. And in this case, that's gone before it. So holding Shift and then user goes before the plugin. I do have that one selected, so I can press the audio tracks button. That will show that plugin window. And now I can adjust the threshold. I can adjust the ceiling. I can do both simultaneously, which is very nice. And I can close that plugin window with the audio tracks button. Pressing the fader bank button to the right goes to the second slot, and I can press the audio tracks button to hide that plugin window. Holding down the Option key plus user brings up the effects browser again. And let's change this to, Let's do XLN audio. Creator set to all. And then I can add in RC20, VST3, and then add that and show it. Oops. Let's go over to Fader Bank. There we go. And this is actually a custom layout that I set up for RC20. So if I go to Alt F2, oh, track selected, come on. And this is a custom layout that I set up a while ago with 2 pages. Yeah, well, the second page is empty. But with 1 page, and these are the different functions. Let's rename this one to just noise. And then save that. And on my overhead view, I've got saying just noise. Noise, wobble, distortion, digital, space, and then the magnetic, overall, tone control and magnitude. And let's go to this view. And here it is again. All these parameters can be controlled simultaneously. I can actually get all of these in my fingers and move them intuitively while listening, and this is a wonderful thing. So no more moving the mouse on one parameter at a time, and I can even adjust the mix by just hitting the flip button so that the faders are controlling the faders, the volume, track volumes, and flip back to parameters. Pretty cool. Not perfect, but pretty good. So that's the Driven by Moss extension for Reaper with Behringer X-Touch Universal. I think this is a good setup, maybe very good, but not perfect and not the best one for me. Mainly it's because of the kind of lack of control for the plugin assignments. I like pretty much everything else. I find I can get through things pretty intuitively. There's a bit of a learning curve, but the general functions are very good. It's just the plugin mapping that's really going to be the thing that I need to be able to completely customize. I want to be able to change the scaling. I want to be able to have 16 parameters available at any time. I want to be able to customize things like if I press the knob twice, that goes to 20% on the plugin parameter. I want to be able to have different toggles and things set up, and maybe even have all of the F keys available as toggles in the selected plugin. But so much of this is really, really good. Even though I'm not going to be using this extension going forward, I think it is very good. He's done a ton of work on it. He's constantly upgrading it. I reported a couple bugs that I found in the past couple weeks, and looks like he's going to be addressing those pretty soon. So yeah, if this sounds like a good setup for you, check it out. I think it is very, very good. There are 2 more extensions that I plan on checking out. The next one is PC only. Ultimately, I won't be using it on my main Mac system, but yeah, that's what's coming up next, the Klinke extension. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.